outlandish. Personally, I'm someone who has been there, seen that, experienced it, freaked out, found some answers, wrote about it, got over it, and now I'm hoping to help others do the same darn thing and understand this mysterious world of ours. If you do dare, go check out my main website, which is HeidiHollis.com. Sound it out, spelled the German way. It's not Heidi or Heidi or Holly. I always get called Holly. People blend my first and last name. It's kind of hilarious. And you're going to find I have YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff on there. So just go and venture on over. And I have to tell you guys, you can listen to this program by way of Inception Radio Network app, the IRN app. And most of you guys, I know you listen to the IRN app because it's just that awesome. And so it's all good. I think you guys are getting the hang of it. But we're also on iHeart, iTunes, absolutely anything and everything you can imagine out there. You can find us. And you can also listen to us by just dialing a number. This is how my parents listen to this show. Just dial 712-770-8888. And I always keep the phone lines open, 1-888-919-2355, or go to Skype and find Inception Radio Network. And you can send your comments and questions as much as you would like. And then there is the irnchat.com chat room where you can interact, listen live, and send your comments and questions there as well. And if you cap your comments and questions, and it makes it easier for me to spot it so I can pose that to the guest. And wow, you guys are in for a really, really awesome show tonight. I cannot even tell you. So I'm going to go and just dive right in. Oh, I have to tell you first. I usually do the Outlandish Corner, and I've been better about that. But last week I did a full show of the Outlandish Corner, and that's where I take your comments and questions and things that you've experienced personally and just spent the whole time answering those. And so this week I was going to skip that, but the Outlandish Corner is always open. Send me whatever it is that you're experiencing out there, from aliens to angels, shadow people, all that stuff, to dusoutlander@gmail.com. It's D as in David, A, S as in Sam, outlander@gmail.com, or just go to my main website, HeidiHollis.com, and you'll find the way. Now I'm going to dive in and introduce my fantastic and awesome guest for this evening. You guys are going to be floored. Rusty McClure. He is a New York Times bestselling author of Crosley, the story of the birth of consumer radio that took place in Cincinnati. His novel, Cincinnatus, begins with Homestead, Florida's Coral Castle, and delves into several other historic and fascinating American elements, including the Society of Cincinnati, America's oldest military society. I have a lot of family over there. Rusty is also a Harvard MBA and graduate of Emory University's Graduate School of Divinity. And he's here to talk about the subject of his fantastic book, Coral Castle. Everybody, give a round of applause for Rusty McClure. They're going crazy, Rusty. I'm so happy I got you for tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Glad to be on the show. Glad to be on your show.
Oh, are you kidding me? This is going to be a fantastic show. I just totally dig the mystery of Coral Castle, and there's so much to get to in regards to it. I guess it's best to kind of begin from the beginning with you and how you came across this mystery and why you found it so fascinating.
Well, I was in Miami at one of those restaurants where they have the bank of all the Florida Keys type tourist places you can go to, the little pamphlets.
Yeah.
And so I grabbed them up on the way into the restaurant, and I started reading them and pitching them, and I find one that describes Coral Castle. And I was in Florida visiting. My wife and I were visiting her parents, our in-laws, and Hurricane Andrew had blasted through Homestead, and we couldn't go visit it because it was all closed down. And the truth is, the only place in Homestead that survived it was that Coral Castle. But the National Guard, and because of the Air Force, base and so forth, we couldn't go down there. And that was in the early 1990s. And I just started, because I was denied probably going there, and I read a lot, I started paying attention to Ed Leeds Skolnin and his Coral Castle. And that's how I got interested in it. So one day I got to visit it.
Wow. So what was that first visit like? I've never been there. I mean, is it just take your breath away? I mean, what is it like?
I started, as you said, working backwards to the biography of Ed and I guess the biography of the castle by interjecting it into a novel that, and starting the novel actually with the mystery of whatever secret he used to build that castle. And we took it off from there, and we went to do research. And as we had built it up in our heads so high, just before we pulled up in the parking lot, found it in what is now basically downtown Homestead. We were worried that we were going to be disappointed. You know, what happens if this was flimsy, small, and a disappointment? And so as we rounded into the parking lot, we were kind of scared that it was what I just said. And here it was. And now it's not the biggest castle. It's not a European castle. Mm-hmm. It's not massive. But when you realize this guy was 5 feet tall and he built it by himself, this thing is very, very large. And so all of a sudden we're looking at it. I mean, the walls are 3 and 4 feet thick. They're 8 and 10 feet high. They are 12 to 20 feet long. Ooh. And it is indeed a very large castle. I mean, these walls are big, thick walls. And then what you find inside are even bigger than the walls. I mean, there's obelisks that are taller and heavier than the biggest obelisk in Stonehenge. Now, it took tribes of Druids 200 and 300 years to drag Stonehenge together. This guy, inside of a very small lifetime, 20, 30 years of his lifetime, built this castle all by himself.
20
so it is
30
a
years.
Very large castle, given what I just told you.
And in comparison, the type of stone that he uses, coral, how does that compare with other stone structures in the world as far as weight and difficulty to work with?
It's very heavy and it's very brittle. So this guy, Ed, was able to carve these big chunks of it and lift them when any mistake you'd make probably would have shattered them. You know, would have dinged them up at least and put cracks in them. Yeah. And that didn't happen. I mean, it didn't happen much because you would have seen it all around on the floor of the castle. I mean, he cut these things in a way that nobody knows how he exactly did it so precisely. And it was not easy. When you look at it, you know it wasn't easy.
Are there any tool markings?
Not much. There's no chips around. They've even had a little, like, people tried to study it almost like an archaeological dig, if you would. Yeah. And what they realized very quickly is he cut these things once. There's not all these chip fragments and pieces all around where he messed up. He was really good at cutting these things straight.
And he got these stones. Where was he harvesting them from?
He harvested them right from there. If you go to South Florida and you dig down through the rich topsoil a foot or 2 or 3, depending on how deep it is, you reach oolite limestone, Oolite limestone. We call it coral rock. And it's just all over the basin of the Everglades, and he mined it right there. Pulled it right up out of the rock after he got the topsoil removed, scraped away.
So that's, I was curious about that. It's like, well, this guy went back and forth and brought those stones from somewhere, but he did it right on his own land.
There's one asterisk to that, and that is the very first time he built much of the elements of the castle, 10, 12 miles away in Florida City, and halfway through the project, let's say, in the 1930s, he moved it to South Dixie Highway, what is now basically part of downtown Homestead. So he did take it from one place to another, but only because he moved his castle. He moved the elements of his castle as he was then going to build the rest of the castle.
So that's fascinating. So when I think about coral, I mean, it's kind of a jagged looking stone.
Yes. It looks,
it looks painful
brittle
if you accidentally bump into it.
Yeah. I mean, it's jagged, but I mean, he cut it smoothly, but it's still a jagged rock when you go to look at it. And I encourage everybody who's listening to go and see this for themselves. They will not be disappointed. You won't be disappointed.
How long does it take for you to go through this castle pretty methodically? I mean, as a new tourist.
45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes if you want to go back and, marvel at some of the things you've seen a second time. It's large for a guy who was 5 feet tall, weighed 100 pounds to have lived there and built it. It's not, it's like I said before, it's not a European castle where, horses and knights and whole village would live inside of it. It's a very large castle for one little hermit to have built and called home. And
he lived there the entire time he was building this thing.
Yes, he did. At the first location and then to the second location.
Wow,
yes.
That's fascinating. And that he moved it. That I don't think I heard before.
Yeah, he moved it, and he hired a guy who was a local guy because he had a great big truck and he had big balloon tires. And one of the things we have to always remember is that nobody ever saw him really do the work. He was very secretive, and he was very remotely, at the time, removed from the small 800 or so people who lived in Homestead Village, let's call it, not even a city. And so he hires a local gentleman to bring his big flatbed truck with balloon tires, and then he loads these major elements on the flatbed truck while the guy leaves the truck, so he can't watch him do it. And the guy, nobody can believe that a guy could pick up all these big pieces and put them on the truck. And then he made the loads through Homestead, and the people saw the elements come through on this truck and go to the new location, but they never got to see him load or unload any of it. He would not allow any of the lifting to be observed any more than the building and the
but they would be in the general vicinity when he was doing it.
They tried to sneak up on him. He had he worked mostly at night, almost exclusively at night.
Okay.
And people would try to stake him out. I mean, one lady took her kids out in a car and quietly rolled the car close to where he was working, and he had these little viewpoints where you could look through the cracks and, kind of like any castle. And he yelled at her and waved at her and said, "How are you?" And immediately stopped working. And that's what he did all the time. He would not let people observe him working. He would stop working if they tried to sneak up on him at night.
Did they ever say they heard something strange, like a high hums or anything, like loud humming or anything, or equipment?
No. I mean, I think we have to walk through the different elements and how he got this going.
Okay.
inside the castle, in addition to the walls, and I refer to it and their elements, there's also a very large, almost medieval, I would say medieval, fort-like 2-story living portion of the castle. Huge slabs of these pieces, carved pieces of this oolite limestone coral rock, are 2 stories high. He built stair steps up to it in one slab. He carved a slab of 16 major stairs, one piece. I mean, I look at it and go, I would have made pieces and jigsawed it together, right?
Yeah, he didn't even have to do that.
He does this in one great big piece.
Wow.
And so he lives upstairs, and the walls are every bit of 3, maybe 4 feet, some places thick. Hot Florida, South Florida sun.
Yeah.
And directly below on the first floor, is this workshop. Now, you asked about humming.
Yeah.
He has a complete, and not a complete at the time, but not complete now, so we don't know what all the elements were, generator to make electricity.
Okay.
Remember, this is 1930s, 1940s, rural Florida. He's built his own generator to make electricity. He has also constructed his own radio and strung, and made tubes out of wine bottles that he's taken wire and wrapped around them, and created his own crystal radio. And then he has built a pretty powerful transmitting unit to transmit radio. So people have heard that humming at times.
See.
I mean, so this guy is not just a rock mason,
right,
or a rock levitator, or whatever, fulcrum lever guy. He also has scientific electric radio mentalities.
What was his background?
He was 3rd or 4th grade educated Latvian immigrant to the United States, whose grandfather was a stonemason.
Ah, okay.
When he was 26 years old, he was going to marry a 16-year-old girl in Riga, Latvia.
Oh, I love this story.
She told him the night before they were going to get married, she wasn't going to go through with it.
Yeah.
He was strange. He was something. The next day, he bolted, left, not just Riga. He left home. He left Latvia. And he headed for Hamburg, Germany. And he got on a ship and landed on Ellis Island. He lands on Ellis Island, goes through immigration with 2 other Latvians, ends up in New Jersey. Now, we know this because he had to pass papers everywhere he went. You don't get through Ellis Island without papers and documentation.
Right.
He ultimately takes those skills of cutting rock that he's learned in his family, and goes to Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, where he's cutting logs, and he's a lumberman with those great big lumber camps.
Now, he came over here by himself, right?
He comes over here by himself and joins up somehow with 2 Latvians, a couple, and they have family in New Jersey, and he spends a little bit of time in New Jersey before he heads west. He crosses over as a Latvian citizen. He crosses over the borders between Canada and the United States and has to pass papers. And every time he does that, it's documented. So we kind of do a forensic, and that's how we know where he went. I mean, we know what ship he sailed on to the United States. We know that he went back and forth across the Canadian-United States border, where he changed his height from 5'1". He grew up to 5'3", even 5'5" sometimes. We interviewed people who knew him in Homestead, Florida, and he said if he was 5 feet tall, he might have been 5'1", but he was definitely never taller than 5'1".
Wow, what a little guy!
Yeah, he's he feels bad about his height. We can imagine because he's pumping it up.
Right.
The next thing we know for sure is that he ends up on the side of the road, Homestead, Florida, in a ditch. I mean, he's lying there emaciated. The guy picks him up. A local townsman picks him up and takes him not to the hospital because this town only has 800 people. So they take him to the only doctor in town. The doctor diagnoses him stage 4 tuberculosis.
Oh, gosh.
It's 1923. There's no penicillin. There's no antibiotics. And that's like, you don't want to say the word stage 4 and tuberculosis in the same sentence. And the same Good Samaritan guy who picked him up takes him home, and he and his wife put him in a tool shed with his wife, and he turned into a hospice-type bedroom for him to die in.
Well, that was kind of them. They could have got sick from that.
Yeah,
My gosh.
Exactly. And the doctor says he has no more than 6 months to live. He'd probably be dead in 100 days. 18 months later, the doctor is visiting him, asking him how he kept himself alive and cured himself. And Edward Leeds Scotland tells the doctor that he used the powers of magnetricity to cure himself. Years later, when he's giving tours of his castle, people are asking him how he built his castle by himself, one man, little man, heavy stone. And Edward Leeds Scotland would tell them he used the powers of magnetricity to lift the stone. He'd say the same thing. He never really explained what magnetricity was. In 1951, he got ill, got on a bus, rode to Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, checked himself in, and died, we think, with the secret of how he built that castle.
How old was he when he passed?
64 years old.
64. Oh, wow.
He was 64 years old. That was, this is early 1950s. Now, he left some pamphlets, like papers that he'd written, little booklets. And one of them he called Magnetic Current. And in that book, now remember, this is a fourth grade educated Latvian immigrant who has taught himself how to read and write. One of the ways he taught himself how to read and write is he went to the movie theater, the single movie theater in Homestead, where they didn't even have sound in the early days, right? It was dubbed in, and he would watch the movies in the coolness of the heat of South Florida, and teach himself English.
Goodness.
So he writes these pamphlets, these papers, and he calls it Magnetic Current. And in the pamphlet, the paper, let's call it, he says that he believes that gravity and magnets are the same. They are cousins. He says that either gravity is a form of magnetism or magnetism is a form of gravity. And he says if you can understand how magnets pull on each other, and then you can understand if you flip like the magnets on your refrigerator over, they repel each other. He says that is the beginning of the secret of how he lifted those rocks. He says, in a sense, but he doesn't really say exactly, but he says in essence that if you flip the magnetism like you do with magnets to gravity, you can actually make these big rocks weightless, and you can lift them, because they were repelling. Now, he's on the front porch of Einstein's equals MC squared, the Royal Borealis lighting.
Yes.
Because there's a bending of the lights, and that happens in the North Pole, not the South Pole, and that's where the magnets are. The magnet forces are, everybody knows, the North Pole, and nobody knows exactly how that happens, but he's on the front porch of something when he says this. And, of course, that springs all kinds of theories, none of which have really been able to be explained totally or duplicated or replicated. And that begins the feeding frenzy of all the kaleidoscope of all the people who come to Coral Castle and wonder
how
in
he
a
did
way
all this.
And here's the difference that makes Coral Castle such an attraction. You can go to Stonehenge. I've been there. You can go to the pyramids. You can go to lots of these other places. And there's nobody who's ever seen or known the people that built them because they died, hundreds and thousands of years ago. But you go to Coral Castle, and they're barely now, but we found them. People, when we wrote the book, we found the people who knew it. I mean, there's actually photographs of the guy who built the castle with the castle. That's not true of Stonehenge or any of these other places for obvious reasons, correct? So and you can get in your car and drive to Stonehenge, to Coral Castle, and you can't get in your car and drive to Stonehenge in the same manner.
Did he ever express why he kept this to himself? I mean, are these people that knew him?
He was a very reclusive, probable genius type of guy who had suffered a heartbreak that was probably disturbing, like all people who have a heartbreak, but maybe more disturbing because he never got over it. He would tell people that he built the castle to attract his, what he called Sweet 16 Agnes Scuffs.
Right.
Everything he did was intentional. He built this slab of steps, like I explained. Mm-hmm. They had 16 steps to him. So he was somewhat disturbed and somewhat high IQ, hermit genius, different from the rest of the people. And he would talk to them in riddles. He would explain it in riddles. And to this day, and the reason we wrote Coral Castle and we put it in our novel is because the mystery's unsolved, we think. Right. There are all kinds of people with all kinds of theories, but none of them have ever gone to South Florida and built a castle right beside the one he built with their theory and practice. Until that happens. Right. Until that happens.
We won't. No, we've got to get to our first break here. Rusty, you guys, you're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering always, if it's weird, we're here. We are speaking with Rusty McClure. We're talking about the mysterious Coral Castle right down in Florida. Just a mystery of a creation that it's mind-boggling. I want to go see it myself. Now, you're talking about the guy who built this structure, and he went on a trip. He got ill. He passed away. And during the break, you were telling me people didn't really notice because he was kind of a reclusive person. And they're like, he's not back. And he just passed away. And here's this mammoth of a castle sitting there. What happened next? Did the neighbors just go, clip the lawn? Who's taking care of this thing now?
Before he died, and we think he we say this in the book, he might have started to get lonely and know that he was not well. He had kidney failure, he'd had a stroke, and he had something wrong with his digestive system. And he reached out to his family in Latvia for the first time in 30 years. And he had brothers. He had obviously no children, no spouse. And he found out that one of his brothers had a grandson living in Detroit, and he willed, therefore, the castle to his grandson who lived in Detroit, who had emigrated to Detroit, Michigan.
Nice.
That grandson, didn't have any money and lost it, couldn't keep it up, lost it because they were back taxes, which weren't very much.
Yeah.
A retired jeweler out of Chicago had moved to South Florida, and he bought it. And he was as fascinated as many of us are. And he reinstituted what Ed had started, which was a tour. You know, you could stop and pay Ed a quarter, and he would give you a tour. So he re-energized the tourist part of the castle, and he took care of it. Wow. And he's passed it since to his family members who have taken care of it. And they like this. They want me to respect their privacy. So they asked me when I met them, and we've worked on, doing these stories to their happiness and their satisfaction, not to bring them into the public eye. But they take very good care of it. It's a
tourist attraction, and you said it's on historic. It's considered a historic site.
National Historic. Somewhere in the around 1980, it got on the National Historic Registry.
Nice.
And so it's protected, and it gets all the notifications and some of the upkeep money that National Historic Registry sites get.
Doesn't this coral rock, it kind of breaks down rather easily? It's kind of brittle. So is it kind of depleting, or is it maintaining
really
well
isn't.
Enough? Or it isn't.
It's lasted thousands of centuries, from when it was formed, the bottom of the ocean, and more importantly, it's lasted these hurricanes. I mean, it just got hammered by the hurricanes that we just had this year. And the gift shop got all torn up, but the castle survived again. The castle, when Hurricane Andrew, as I said at the top of the show, blasted through and took out Homestead Air Force Base even, it didn't take out the castle. 3 to 4
feet thick walls there. That's the place to be. That's a great fallout shelter. Gosh. Huh. It doesn't look like it would be comfortable to walk barefoot on.
No, it doesn't. It is not. No, it isn't. It's I mean, he smoothed over a lot of the elements in the inside, and we can talk about those elements in a minute. Yeah. I did want to point out that after he died, and this is like the mid 50s now, a whole bunch of people obviously start moving into South Florida. And here sits this castle. And the new people that move in hear pieces of the story. And, of course, they think it's a local urban legend. And there's but one little guy could build this castle. And, these locals don't. This is their story. But the locals start hearing that. Yeah. And there's a lady, lives in Homestead, Florida, and she gets fired up about the fact that one day, not only Ed is going to be passed away, but all of us will be passed away, and no one will know this story. So she gets a affidavit and creates in the affidavit spaces for the local people to identify themselves. I ran the post office. I was the third grade teacher in Homestead, Florida for 20 years. I was whatever I was, and I knew Ed Leedskalnin. And Ed Leedskalnin worked at Loan and built this castle all by himself. And then they would sign the affidavit and have it notarized.
Wow.
There was space in the affidavit for them to add anything they wanted to. There's over 250 of these affidavits. Remember, the town only had 800 people in it.
Yeah.
Filed in the Dade County Courthouse as, certified documentation of people. Homestead, Florida, said that Ed Leeds Scullin worked alone, built this all by himself, never had any help, and they lived and knew him all this time.
That's amazing. That's cool that they took it upon themselves to do something like that. He kind of reminds me of Tesla. This reclusive genius that died alone and didn't, there was like no way to really definitively define how he came about his ideas and what he did. And
exactly.
But, I have to say though, I'm very much about teach others, grow the world's mind a bit, and for him to keep it to himself, he knew he had cracked the code of something miraculous, and he kept it to himself. And it's like he didn't want any competition. He was selfish. He was hoping to gain the attention of his love, but it's like, but you could have enlightened the world. Do you see that as a selfish act, or just that he was a weird person who just didn't get other people?
He was definitely an intelligent person.
Yeah.
So he knew what he was doing. I think he was playing with people, enjoyed the fact that he had this mystery, as I enjoyed. That's what intrigued me, the fact that he didn't tell anybody, and he may have very well struck upon some piece of futuristic, or let's say maybe, and we'll talk about that in a minute, the past of lost understanding. And so he would tell these people this magnetricity, and he'd write this paper and he'd stop short. I don't think that was an accident. He answered your question. I think he did it on purpose. He didn't want to tell people, or he was going to tell them later, and the Grim Reaper got him before he could tell.
But he knew he was sick. He knew he was ill.
He was sick. Now, he also told people that he had learned and discovered the secrets that helped the Egyptians build the pyramids.
Right.
So on the north wall, which is the far wall of the beginning of the entire castle, he replicates, at the highest part, he replicates the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid.
Come on.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And so he has the same elements, and they are the heaviest parts of the entire castle, of the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
How many square feet is he living in? I'm curious. How many square feet is that?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's pretty big.
Okay.
It's pretty. Wow. It's pretty. I mean, there's two answers to that question, I guess. One is his living unit, which I described as 2-story, and I would say those are maybe 800 square feet at most, maybe 750, something like that.
Yeah.
One on top of another. So there's more than 1,500 square feet, and they're stacked because they're 2-story. Now, the castle itself, is very large in comparison. And so at the back end, he's got these, and they are the heaviest elements of the entire castle, which is kind of like saying, look at me. Not only I tell you that I discovered the secrets of this pyramid, but I put the heaviest element at the highest part. Now, how'd I get it up there? How'd I get it up there and look at it, and then go look at the king's tomb of the Great Pyramid, and you will see exactly the same shape. And then he dies. It's like, I'm not going to tell you anymore, and now I'm dead. And now you're going to have to live with this and try to figure it out for yourself. I don't know what he was telling us. I mean, that's the mystery of it. we can't go ask him.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. So that opens the door to all the theories, and people are passionate about their theories.
I bet.
And people get disappointed because we wrote this, what I would say, a journalistic view of the castle and Ed, and we talk about some of those theories, and we are slightly dismissive, or maybe slightly more than dismissive of those theories, but we never say that any of the theories have worked, and we do not have any of our own theories. Jack Heffern and I do not have any of our own theories about this castle because we didn't set out to do it. So every once in a while, people get disappointed in us because we wrote the mystery of Coral Castle, but we didn't write the solving of the mystery, but we didn't advertise it.
Is there anything between the stones to help connect them? Any kind of material?
No, there's a little bit of stuff growing in them, but he's got them jammed right up perfectly on top of each other, which is another. Huh. They're on their own, and what makes this so incredible is, and we got to talk about these things are straight up and down.
Yeah,
they are aimed and hung perfectly. So let's talk about two of the elements that are doors.
Okay,
two of them are doors, and one of them is 5,000 pounds.
Huh.
It is a swinging wall. It is 5,000 pounds, and it is perfectly balanced for 40 years. So let's say 35, 40 years. It is perfectly balanced. Goodness. So that a young kid, 12-year-old kid, could put their hand on it and turn this 5,000-pound door wall, and it turns into a door. It pivots.
Oh, wow.
Now, he's long dead. It's decades ago. That collapses. That door collapses. It's on the National Historic Registry, the ownership of the place, Coral Castle. Mm-hmm. Get a hold of the University of Florida Engineering Department. They bring people down to look at it. And underneath this 5,000-pound slab is a Ford Model A truck axle. He set it perfectly on this axle.
That's crazy.
And in the Florida sun, and under that weight, 30 years later, it rusted, and that's why it collapsed.
Oh, wow.
So what they do is they pick up with a huge crane and lift this thing straight up in the air. It takes 6 or 7 people in a crane. And that's what they find. And they find that he has drilled a perfect hole up through this 5,000-pound slab. They look at it and say the only way, first of all, he found the geographic center of this slab, the perfect geographic center, or otherwise it wouldn't have hung perfectly and it wouldn't have pivoted perfectly. And he drills a hole up through the middle of it so that he can balance it. And these guys look at it and said, the only way you could drill this hole that straight and that perfectly is you'd have to have a laser beam.
Oh.
He did not have a laser beam because there was no such thing in the 1920s and 30s.
Jeez. So really, that's the best that they could come up with. That's crazy.
All right. So now they got it up. There are these guys, there are these engineering guys, and they go, wait a minute. Heidi, have just been talking about how brittle and hard this rock is.
Right.
So this 5,000-pound door has been swinging on this axis. You know what a pestle is, of course, right? You know what a pestle. So if this thing would be spinning around, it would be turning the rock underneath it into sand and gravel very quickly, correct?
Yeah.
It'd be like a pestle. It would be grinding its way. So they're going, now we got this up. How come there's not a pile of sand underneath where this 5,000-pound door was swinging back, pivoting?
Right.
So there's a piece of rock, and I've held it in my hand, that might be 12, 14 inches long, might be 6 inches wide, and it's not very thick.
Mm-hmm.
Inch thick at most. And that's what this 5,000-pound door has been spinning on. They send it off to the University of Florida, their colleagues in the geology department. They have it for a couple of weeks. They send it back. Material not of this planet.
Oh, really?
In other words, he either had it with him or he went out in South Florida and he found this piece of rock that is not elements of this planet.
But how would he know that would hold up? He had to know something special was with that piece he had.
The title of our book has the word mystery right at the top of it. The mystery of it. I mean, this is just like how did a guy know that was it? You know, where did
this
he find
will hold it? So that brings up the discussion then of, was he having alien contact? Did he learn this from some other type of entity?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
I have met several geniuses who have invented things that are beyond the scope of what is normal, and they all said something that was a similar thought. They would wake up with these ideas and then help it come to life. And one in particular who had created a anti-gravity like motor that the governments just weren't interested in. He said, I believe something is implanting it in my mind when I sleep at night to know what to do, because I wake up with the answers and I just know what will work. And he does it. And I'm like, well, you know, it makes you wonder, you know, what are we open to when we go to bed at night? And, you know, and some of these ideas that get dropped in our minds, you know, it's quite fascinating that, you know, there's just those geniuses that are part of a generation that know certain things, that know how to pull something together than the next person doesn't and can never solve. I mean, it's quite fascinating. This guy was a Tesla of a sort. He really was.
He was. We have a picture of Tesla in our book. I mean, we talk about that. So you're spot on. And think about this. Have you ever, of course you have, tried to hang like a mirror or a painting, and somebody's standing back while you're holding it, and you're trying to make it right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how hard would that, and all of a sudden it gets really heavy, right? And you can't, you tell them very quickly, you start saying to them, you know, make a decision. Well, who was holding this thing up when he was getting it exactly right when it was 5,000 pounds? I mean, these engineers that have looked at this said the only way that thing could spin and turn that easily is it had to be absolutely geographically, gravitationally centered.
It's crazy. It's like he found a Star Trek tricorder that one of the crew left behind, and he goes, "Well, how do I work this thing?" And he just went buck wild with it.
All right. Well, let's talk about another one. There's an obelisk.
Okay.
There's an obelisk in the castle. This obelisk is 30, 40 tons. Goes straight up in the air, like 40 feet. And he's drilled a circle in this granite obelisk. At the top, he's got a perfect round circle drilled in it. And in between, remember, the tools he has are stuff that he built out of the junkyard. He's got like 2 coat hangers. One's vertical, one's horizontal, implanted in, notched way up in this obelisk. And what happens is, it is lined up. Now, remember, you got a 40-foot obelisk. Mm-hmm. It weighs 30 tons, and he's lined it perfectly to the North Star.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's interesting.
He's aligned it perfectly to the North Star. And this crosshairs comes down to a piece of metal embedded in one of the coral rock walls inside the castle. So now you look straight up through where the notch is of this metal piece up to the crosshairs. And every season, the North Star moves from one quadrant to the next quadrant to the next quadrant and then repeats.
Oh, wow.
And it's now, how does he get that thing up in the air, and how does he aim it right at, and how does he know to do it exactly so that, the North Star moves inside these quadrants as the seasons change? 4 seasons, 4 quadrants, and every 90 days you have a change of season, and you have a change of quadrants of the North Star.
That is fascinating.
How does he know to do that?
He was a little guy. Maybe he was the alien. How about that? Huh.
See, now you're into theories, and all I know is he knew stuff that we don't know. He knew
right. Well, someone mentioned here in the chat room, if there's an obelisk, then there may be a statue of Isis nearby. Who knows?
All right. Well, then let's just move on, because we're going to run out of time. There's so many neat things to talk about. Yeah. He also has invented a solar clock calendar.
Oh. Huh.
And, you picture a solar clock, right? A solar...
Yes.
That's not it. He creates a entirely different one that he etches into the stone, and it changes with the seasons, and it is totally different. It's a one of a kind, and he's lined it up with the sun, and it works and tells time.
It works and tells time. Wow.
It works and tells time, and it tells time differently. The way it works, it tells time differently every season, every day. It is adjusting for the seasons at that latitude.
Oh goodness!
And it's not what you think. It's not a solar clock like you see in gardens all over the world. He has invented his own solar clock. It's one of a kind.
Has that been attempted to be replicated?
Well, I think you could, but I don't know how to do it. I'm not that guy. But if it has been, I don't know about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tried to do that. But how did he do it? How did he know to put this rock and carve it just right, and it's aimed perfectly at the sun, and it tells time? You can a docent take you out there in the middle of the courtyard of this castle, and they show you, and you can read it. And tomorrow it'll be a little bit different, but it's going to adjust. It's a piece of stone, and but the way it's designed, it's going to adjust seasonally and still be able to tell time every day, accurately. Every hour of every day.
That's the amazing part. It's like there's so many different elements to this guy that it's just not he was good at lifting up something, placing something. He's doing so many different things that
he's
just
building
are a combination.
An electric generator. He's building an electric generator. He's building a radio.
He's ahead of his time. He's a genius of another time too.
He's not just a stone cutter. He's not just a stone cutter.
We've got to get to our next break. You guys, you're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we're speaking about the Coral Castle with Rusty McClure. Rusty, what's your website really quick so the listeners can check it out before we continue here?
CoralCastleBook.com.
Awesome. Very cool. We were chatting during the break, and there's so much to cover yet. And I just want you to dive right in. We're talking about, I was curious if he left any information to say, this is my favorite part of the castle or this or that. But you said no, but there's special designated areas in the castle for certain things. So go ahead and tell our listeners what you were just talking about.
Yeah, he didn't leave notes, as Heidi was asking me, but he left he gave tours, and the people of Homestead would come and see it. And when people came to visit him, they would all want to go out and take the tour of Homestead, Coral Castle. So they met Ed, and Ed would tell them about these elements. So he, once again, was trying to attract Agnes Scuffs to come from Latvia and marry him and have children. And so he built a whole wing for, he built a bedroom. He built actually stone beds and stone tables. He built a punishment area for children, and that would have been enough to scare her. And and so he would explain this.
Was it a dungeon?
It's basically a timeout dungeon.
What?
To discipline the kids. To discipline the kids in a let's call it a medieval. A lot of the pieces inside are kind of medieval looking, and so he also built a bathtub, and he took baths there. People of the time marveled that he was able to find fresh water, and he carved his way down to a well, stepstones down to fresh water, and he used that well as a refrigerator for his vegetables and his vegetable garden, and people go, how the heck did he find water when we can't find water? And it was right in the middle of the well. So people thought that was cool. The bathtub was cool. He had a very large table that he built and carved in the shape of the state of Florida. That was complete with a carved Lake Okeechobee in the middle, right where it belongs, and he pasted in some concrete so that it would hold water, and to this day it holds water. Then he built a table to have dinner with his Agnes Scuffs. Of course, she never came, and he put it in the shape of a heart. He carved a big heart table complete with chairs, and Ripley's, believe it or not, and they call it the largest Valentine ever made because it's 5,000 pounds. So and these were places that he would go and show people. So you asked me did he leave a documentation of it? Yes, in the sense that it was an oral lore of these places and the stories that he would tell them. He carved chairs that you can go and recline in, that he would read in. He would go up to Dade County or Miami Library, and he'd check out books, and a lot of them were scientific books, and he had these chairs that were facing different parts of where the sun would then come over his reclining chairs would come over his shoulders so he could lie and read. And you can lie in these chairs and you don't think you're on a rock chair at all. They are contoured to feel like they are soft.
I was wondering because I see a picture of him sitting on it and others sitting on it, and I'm like, that just looks painful. But you're saying it's comfortable. I've sat in them. I've sat reclined in them, and they are just contoured. They are absolutely comfortable and feel almost soft. They're so well designed. That's amazing. They're so well rounded. So there's all these little pieces, and he would tell everybody about them, and he would tell them why they were there, and he would tell people he'd take his bath in the bathtub that he carved, and no, there's no real notation of it, but we did all our research and we found all these pictures. Actually, we found a vault in a bank, and there were pictures that nobody had ever seen before. And and so we asked them if we could use them in our book, and we used them. And then all we had to do was tell people that the bank had provided them, because they were the guys. We'd heard as we did our research that there was people that had pictures they'd never seen before, and so some of the actual owners of the castle had got to see some pictures that they had never seen before. What a treat! The First National Bank of South Florida did that. Now, in
these pictures, we got to talk about the black box before we run out
yes,
of time.
I want to hear about this black box. It's a mystery.
All right. So how did he lift these rocks? I'm not going to tell you how he lifted them because I don't know. And lots of people have theories. But what we have, and they're in the book, there are pictures. He had 3 pieces, big long pieces of Florida pine that he made large tripods out of. Think telephone poles. I mean, he would get these big pieces of Florida pine and he would make rounded tripods. He had block, tackle, and chains. And in these pictures, at the top of the 30, 40 foot high tripods that really don't look like they could hold all this weight of these elements are black boxes. Black boxes, like great big toolbox, maybe size black boxes. I've never seen one. I've never touched one. All I can look at is in the picture. If you look in the picture, you'll see these black boxes. So
yes.
There's actually one picture we found that had 2 tripods and 2 black boxes, one on top of each of the tripods. When he disappeared to Miami and died in 1951, no one could visit the castle and find even one of those black boxes. I mean, no one who has come forward has ever said they ever found one of those black boxes.
And it wasn't with him when he passed away either.
They weren't with him. They were gone. You know, when the subsequent people, when they found out he had passed away and they went to the castle, there's no black box. No one ever saw what was inside those black boxes. No one ever saw those black boxes contribute to the lifting, whatever those pulleys and block and tackle chains did. No one's been ever been able to lift anywhere close to these tonnage of these rocks without the black box, and nobody's ever been able to use a black box. We believe that those black boxes contributed some way to the lifting of those huge, brittle pieces of rock.
I don't see how he even propped up the tripod. It's huge.
The tripod's huge, but the pieces of rock are bigger. So when you look at, they're huge compared to, telephone poles, I guess. Compared to him, because he's only 5 foot tall. But when you see the massive pieces of rock that he got up in the air, they don't look so big.
Right.
And those chains,
he did this over 20, 30 years time span. So, then you said he moved it. And there was an interesting element you told me about what he moved it, where it lays.
Today, yes. He moved it once. He only moved part of it because the rest of it he built in the location that it is in now. Many of the elements were built there after he moved it. So we only moved pieces of it.
I see.
The first generation of it, let's call it.
Okay.
But these black boxes. Now I have one story. I got to know the docents. I've done shows there, and I've gone down and I've done talks.
But so real quick though, the ley line, just real quick, that when he moved it, the ley line where he put it, it's on what?
Exactly. People who are listening in, many of them will know what a ley line is, but I'll explain quickly. There are magnetic lines across this the core of the Earth that have been discovered by a guy whose last name I believe is Ley, L-E-Y, Dr. Ley in Europe. There are more Stonehenges than just the one Stonehenge. There are in Denmark and other places in Europe. And he discovered that these ley lines are part of the magnetic field. And they pass right through many of these Stonehenges and these henges. They also form the Bermuda Triangle, according to people who follow ley lines.
That's amazing.
Now, when he moved the castle, like some 10 miles from Florida City to Homestead, he placed the castle, we find, where the front door is on the very edge of the ley-lined corner that forms the Bermuda Triangle.
That's amazing. That's crazy. That's crazy. But I didn't want you to get too sidetracked.
Right.
I just thought that was pretty cool.
We need to. I mean, there's so many of these elements.
Yeah.
And remember,
Yeah.
This is one human being. This
Exactly.
is not a tribe of druids. This is not a nation. This is not a nation of Egyptians building a pyramid. This is one human being with 250 affidavits signed by the people who said he's one guy. Nobody ever helped him. Nobody watched him. So this is one guy, and he's doing all of this in a couple 3 decades.
Right.
So you have this rock that isn't of the earth, that's propping this thing up. You have this ley line. You have this North Star.
The black boxes that have disappeared.
Boxes now.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going back to the story I was starting to tell that I really want to tell because all is a story. It's not verified. So I'm with the docents. The book's been out a couple of years, and I'm hanging out at Coral Castle with a film crew. And I go to the docents. I go, all right, you guys read the book? Yep, you've read the book. Anything I missed? And they say, well, not really. One guy, they go, well, there's one story, but we can't verify it. And he said, when Homestead got hit by Hurricane Andrew, the only place the National Guard could go was the castle. They set up camp around the castle because it was the only place that, had a... And they said... So then they set up a communications base with radio, and they said the story is that the communications base started getting interference from the radio. The radio was getting interference.
Wow!
And they said we heard the story that they realized that in the well in the middle of the castle seemed to be the place where the interference was. The United States Army, Corps of Engineers, etc. They get a diver. The diver goes down into the water, way down into this well that he carved, and they found a black box.
Uh-huh.
And they pull the black box up, and the Army took it away, and nobody's ever heard anything about it since.
Of course not.
The docents tell me that's a story. No, there's no way to verify it.
You would think he'd store it in his absolute most secure location on his property, so it makes sense it would be somewhere there.
Well, it makes a great story, so I wanted to tell him. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
And we, I haven't added it in the book because I always want to have something to say that nobody's been able to read in the book. So there it is.
Yeah.
And I think that, and there's so many cool things about this guy and what he did that I love that story, even if it may not be true. And the docent said they have no way of knowing it's true, but they've heard the story, so they shared it with me, and I hadn't heard it.
Has anybody ever gone over bit by bit over the property to see if there is any
it's a
secret
Mecca.
Cavern or something?
There's
somewhere?
a Mecca. They come with every device. They measure it. There was a guy came that I was told this was probably 20 years ago from MIT, and he measured everything. And he said he'd be back in 3 or 4 weeks because he'd figured it out. And they never saw him again, but he measured everything. There was actually a guy from Australia who was so interested in the castle that he thought it needed better aerial photographs. So he came all the way from Australia. People come from all over the world and do all kinds of guessing and measuring and calculating and trying to figure out their own. And it's fun. It's fun to hear it. But again, they've never built their own castle. And there's a guy in Indiana or maybe Michigan now who has come up with a way of fulcruming with a whole bunch of sand. And I thought that was really cool. And I thought he might be onto something. He might be. But the problem is there's no sand around the castle. Where they would have taken he would have had to dig big holes in sand. And so people come around and so the guy from Australia, he came over and hired a pilot, and he flew over the castle, and they took all kinds of pictures, aerial pictures. This guy came all the way from Australia to do that.
Nice.
People have thought everything they could do because as long as the mystery stays a mystery. And there are people who think he just was a guy who was really good with levers and fulcrums and never, he was an artisan and he never wanted anybody to know any more than that. So he told about all these other stories in the black box and everything else just because Ed was playing with everybody. And that's a theory.
Artists can be very, very secretive when they have a method that is being revered and they want to be known for something. They can be very secretive on their process. So that's not surprising. What's surprising is the length this guy went. It's just, I mean, because he could have taught and so many people could have benefited off from knowing what he knew because he knew this was a feat none had accomplished before. There's a question in the chat room. Rick is asking, and I'm curious about too, if there's been any other odd phenomena in the area, UFOs, ghostly-like things, or odd apparitions around this castle.
Not that I know of. No, but I don't live down there, and I just spent all my time working off of the castle when we built the book. Built the story around the book and the elements.
Yeah.
But we've talked to a lot of people, but there's no seances that have brought Ed back to life and have him visit or any of those things that we know about. I always thought, he was basically buried in a potter's grave in Miami because people didn't know him and didn't claim, and it took a while for him to find out. I always thought they ought to move him and bury him, on the property. Ed belonged on the property.
Did they find where he's literally at? He's oh yeah, he's in a big pile.
They know where he is.
Oh.
He's buried in a public cemetery in Miami.
I'm surprised he wasn't haunting the place. He put a lot into his place. Goodness.
It's kind of off the topic, kind of parallel to it. But I at least think he ought to be buried. I've told the people that own it, he ought to be buried on the castle.
Truly,
in my opinion. But what do I count?
He made a living off from tours of this castle too, right?
He charged 25 cents, 10 cents, whatever, depending. And he sold vegetables, traded vegetables. He grew vegetables for heating oil. He raised some a little bit of livestock, and he had a complete cooker, crock pot, if you will, barbecue made out of pieces of engine parts, and you can those are all still there. You can see where he cooked, and he ate. He was a little guy. He didn't eat a whole lot. He took care of himself. He traded out some of his vegetables, and he got some revenue. And here's probably another peek into his genius or his IQ.
Yeah.
Over the decades, he never charged anybody to come back to the castle a second time, and people swore that he would always remember him. So there was somebody who went to his Florida City place and paid, I think, 10 cents, and like 12 years later, she came to the homestead, new one, and he remembered that she had been to the other one. He says, "Oh, I never charge if you come again." And people would swear, how the heck could he remember when I wasn't here for 10 years? And then he remembered, and he said, "I never charge if you come back, when you come back."
Wow. Huh.
He was
amazing.
really different. He had a sign that said, ring twice. If you didn't ring twice, he wouldn't answer and he wouldn't give you a tour. It said, ring twice for tour. Put the money in, ring twice. If somebody rang once, no tour.
Did he walk them through, or did he just let them walk through on their own?
He led them. He led them. They had to follow. They were not allowed to ask any questions. They listened to he was totally proud. He chattered and he told all about how wonderful it was. We interviewed people about this. And they wrote little things in the margins on the affidavits that helped us compose the book. And so he says, you don't ask, you're not allowed to ask any questions. Nobody ever gets ahead of me. And he pridefully showed all these elements that we've been talking about. And then at the end, they were allowed to ask questions if they had behaved.
If they behaved. Wow.
If they hadn't tried to...
I'm curious
if they hadn't wandered off, if they hadn't interrupted him, if they behaved, if they didn't ring the bell twice, they weren't even going to get a tour.
He had a lot of rules. So he was a bit, was he arrogant and strange? Okay. A question for you. Agnes, did she ever know what he had created for her?
Yes.
What did she think
we
of it?
established that. And there's a question whether Agnes really existed, by the way.
Oh.
But then we reached out and found her niece. She was still alive when we were writing the book. And so we think Agnes in one way or shape or another. And so people in the community knew that he had contacted Agnes, and there are people in Latvia who now are aware of this because of the internet and the Iron Curtain coming down and what have you.
Yeah.
And the best I can tell you is Agnes did exist. She knew about it, and she said, that little guy is weird, and I don't care if he built a castle or not. I'm not coming to the United States to mess with him.
She knew that.
No.
She knew it. She knew for him to have the genius that he did. It seems like geniuses are a little awkward. So she called it out, right?
Yeah. She was 16, he was 26, and somehow she figured out he was weird. And I think he did a lot of great things, but I think he was also weird. And I think she was correct. Yeah.
My goodness. So go ahead and give the title of your book and your website and your other book, the New York Times bestseller. I mean, my goodness, we can't go without mentioning that.
We wrote Coral Castle. Jack Heffern and I did. It's called Coral Castle, The Mystery of Ed Leeds Skolnin and His American Stonehenge. And there's a picture of Ed in the castle elements, some of them on the cover. My first book was Crosley. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's the story of the two brothers Crosley who created consumer radio for the world, just like Henry Ford, who didn't invent the car, created consumer cars for the world. That took place in Detroit. The Crosleys built WLW, the most powerful radio station in the world, and they built Crosley radios. And then they built the Crosley car and so forth. In between those two books that are joined is the book Cincinnatus, which is a novel I wrote with David Stern. He wrote the Blair Witch Project, among other things. It is the story of Ed's secret not being buried and lost forever, but passed through the Society of the Cincinnati, the oldest, and this is true, but the fact that he passed it is not true. Yeah. The oldest, if you look up the Society of the Cincinnati, for which Cincinnati is named for, they're still headquartered on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C., the oldest military organization on the North American continent. Most people don't know about it. Founded by Major General Henry Knox. And so they purportedly, fictionally, have Ed's secret.
Really? I love that.
So it's kind of an American Da Vinci Code type book, cool. And we got the sequel working, almost done. But so there are two books that actually have Coral Castle. One's as true as we know it to be, and we didn't take sides on the theories. We're just fascinated by it. We're fascinated by all the theories.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And you have to go. So you have to read the book and decide for yourself.
Yes.
You have to go to Coral Castle, and
check it out.
Everyone will not be disappointed. They will not be disappointed.
Rusty McClure, I got to say thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It was absolutely fascinating and great to have you on. I'm glad you made it.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so hold the line. I'm going to close the show up. You guys, I come to the bottom of another very cool show. This is really nice. Remember, you can catch me here every Friday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. You've been listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering always, if it's weird, we're here. And stay tuned for UFO Headline News coming right up that I also host. You guys have an awesome, awesome weekend. Good night, everybody.